Hey there, Pacific Time listeners. It's Greg Ammerfell, and today's episode is, well, it's a bit of a hike, and we're heading off trail. There's no guests today, no spiritual guides, just me, a dog-eared Kindle, a microphone, and a cup of green tea. Yeah, I'll also have my standard array of open-ended questions. You might even hear an attempt at a dramatic reading from an untrained thespian. I mean, hey, if we can't be playful and subversive when the world is going to hell, what are we even doing? This episode is about independence, and also about interdependence, and also about secession, and about personal sovereignty and public land. And that feeling you get when you look at the national political landscape and think, hey, is this even salvageable? So yeah, stick with me. I promise it'll make sense eventually. I'm going to try and sum up some of the things we've heard from guests so far, and also share reflections that have been brewing in me for years, and some others that have come up in the last few weeks. And I'm going to talk about a book, because yeah, as I delve into the subject of West Coast independence, people and chatbots keep suggesting things to read. I love it. And also, let's be honest, if I had a nickel for every time I tried to renew my passport online this year, I'd have enough to fund a bioregional summit. I mean, where the hell did our country go? So one book in particular that keeps coming up, it's a little strange, a little retro, and maybe a little prophetic, like a Betamax with Bluetooth. Today I'm going to talk about the book Ecotopia. Ecotopia turns 50 next year. It was written by Ernest Kallenbach in 1975 and imagines a breakaway nation formed when Northern California, Oregon, and Washington secede from the U.S. to create a society centered on ecological sustainability, social equality, and local community. It's part political satire, part speculative fiction, and part blueprint. Reading it today, Ecotopia feels like a dispatch from a future we haven't quite caught up to. Like so many good things that catch their stride in middle age. It's a book that also feels eerily relevant to this very moment, when red and blue America seem to be hanging together by a thread, when climate goals are under siege, and when the idea of breaking away, once unthinkable, is suddenly in the discourse. But this isn't an episode about policy proposals or legal viability. This is a walk through the big what if that Ecotopia dares to ask. The story is told through the journal of William Weston, an American journalist sent to report on the seceded nation 20 years after it formed, to take in what's changed after the length of a single generation. At first, Weston sees it all as a little naive, tree-hugger fantasyland, communes and compost toilets. But gradually, the logic of Ecotopia starts to win him over. The U.S. press has painted Ecotopians as regressive, tribal, maybe even dangerous. They've nationalized industries, shrunk their military, and decentralized governance. Their economy runs on stability and self-sufficiency instead of growth. Their social norms are, let's just say, really liberal. And I imagine Weston as one of those East Coast types. You know the ones. A little stuffy, a little pinched, a little preppy. It's sort of hard to imagine otherwise given their prep school upbringing and the time they spend in the Hamptons. Their existence in a rigid class hierarchy. He might sound something like this.
The people here are very peculiar, very much given to wild ideas and gross excesses. And yet, something in them seems deeply right. I'm afraid that I'm beginning to understand them, and this disturbs me more than I can say.
But the longer Weston stays, the more he begins to question his assumptions. Their economy is circular, not extractive. Cities are lush and breathable. People are active and healthy. The arts thrive. Education is creative and outside. Public dialogue is active, emotional, participatory. There's some clunky stuff in this book, like self-imposed racial segregation that's deeply problematic. But overall, Weston finds himself wondering, is this actually better? Like a lot of those East Coast types, he starts unwinding as he realizes how good life on the West Coast is.
In Ecotopia, nobody pretends that the purpose of life is to consume endlessly. They assume, almost without thinking, that humans are meant to grow, to change, to relate, to contribute.
By the end of the book, Weston faces a choice: return to the US and write his report, or stay and join this new society. His arc, from cynic to believer, isn't just the story of one man, it's a parable about possibility, that we can, if we're willing, leave behind systems that feel inevitable and build something that feels alive. And that's the pivot point of the story. What if this isn't a fantasy? What if it's a prototype? Here's where I want to pause the book review and turn the lens outward, because Ecotopia is clearly fiction, but like all great fiction, it offers a lens on what's real. Because let's face it, the American experiment is wheezing. Reading Ecotopia today, it's impossible not to draw parallels. In 2024, political division is not just ideological, it's geographic, it's cultural, it's epistemological, hey, it's grammatical. Some states, California among them, have already started behaving like independent nations. On some days, California's trade surplus might actually look better than the federal government's. And they've got better wine. Whether on policy related to climate, tech regulation, or immigration, we're broadcasting in high def while the US is in grainy low def. Before the 2024 elections, conservatives in Texas and Florida floated the idea of breaking away from what they portrayed as an overreaching liberal federal government. On the West Coast, each time Donald Trump has won an election, whispers of independence get louder in the face of threats to our climate goals, our civil rights, our basic freedoms, our rule of law. The Cal Exit folks report that interest has never been higher, and reluctance about secession never lower. Weston's transformation from East Coaster to West Coaster may just be irreversible, because here's the thing about Ecotopia.
It is not only their institutions that are different, it is the people themselves. They are in some way freer than I ever felt, perhaps than I have ever dared to feel.
Ecotopia wasn't really about secession, not in the political sense. It was about a way of living. It was about personal sovereignty, and it was a challenge to the idea that modern industrial capitalism is the only path forward. It asked, what if the West Coast didn't just lead the country in progressive policy, but actually built something fundamentally different? What if sustainability wasn't a buzzword, but the backbone of an entire society? And that's where Ecotopia still resonates today, because even if full separation isn't realistic or desirable, the idea that we can create self-sustaining, resilient, forward-thinking communities within the U.S. still holds power. As does the idea that a state centered on personal freedoms and local decisions, with citizens hashing things out in the open through civil discussion, well, that kind of place need not be so rules-based nor constrictive. National identity in a place like that, suggests Kallenbach's rendering, isn't about flags, songs, and symbols. It's about a culture in which people get to be themselves and where active day-to-day participation in community is assumed. Ecotopians are fiercely, authentically proud of their country. The West Coast is a long way from having a national identity or fierce pride in a shared cultural identity. It comes up a little bit with the least coast, best coast debates in sports and music. And sure, when California sets fuel efficiency standards for cars that are followed around the world, or our attorney generals go to court to stop abusive executive orders, yeah, we take pride in our influence. My question, if we on the West Coast took stock of who we are, how we're different from the rest of the country, and what our vision is for the future, undiluted by federal interference and machinations, could we be on the path to achieving an identity, autonomy, full-on independence? But let's face it, we've got a federal government that feels less like a democratic institution and more like an ATM machine for lobbyists with a side hustle and culture war chaos. Ronald Reagan's small government daydreams are getting fulfilled by 3 disgraceful Ds: downsizing, demoralization, and defunding. Not to mention a bonus 4th D, dramatics. Environmental protections are getting undone. Voting rights and health freedoms rolled back. Spanish-speaking neighbors are afraid to go outside. Foreign-born colleagues are afraid to speak up. American crown jewels like higher ed and medical research are in retreat. Trade policy and international alliances, don't get me started. Our West Coast leaders push back and resist, but in ways that feel performative. When our intuition, our heritage, is disruption, reinvention. Back in 2016, after Trump won, I posted 3 words on Facebook: West Coast secession. I wasn't calling for a revolution. I was naming a feeling. The moment of heartbreak when you realize that the country you thought you lived in doesn't exist, or that sadly, and I may need a tissue here, your West Wing fantasies are dashed to pieces. Friends reached out about my Facebook post, some intrigued, some upset. One wrote, "What about us from New York?" And when on Inauguration Day 2025, I announced Pacific Time and my exploration of West Coast independence, another friend said, "Wait, what about Chicago?" And yeah, good points. Blue America doesn't stop at the Sierras. But my impulse wasn't about exclusion. It was about preservation. About the West Coast saying, we want to do things differently, and maybe we already are. Maybe we can trust ourselves to hold on to the democratic values and the constitutional order that's being trashed in DC pretty much the way they said they would. Here's where things get interesting. I'm beginning to think, after a handful of conversations with the brilliant people who gracefully offer to be part of this baby podcast, that independence and interdependence are not mutually exclusive. Mickey McManus, the visionary technologist and systems thinker, asked, what if we became extremists in a different direction? What if the West Coast led a sanctuary society, one where hybrid vigor, civic joy, and shared ecosystems replaced walls and wedges? Mickey reminded me that nature thrives on interdependence, that monocultures fail, that complexity isn't a bug, it's the source of strength. So when I talk about independence, I'm not talking about cutting ourselves off. I'm talking about coherent autonomy, the ability to set our direction even while participating in wider systems. Marcus Ruiz-Evans, the founder of CalExit, makes a strong case for full independence. He doesn't just theorize. He documents trade deals signed by California governors, lawsuits launched against federal overreach, our role as a donor region. As Marcus puts it, tell me the country where people live in terror during every election cycle. That's not a first world democracy. He believes California is already acting like a nation. It's just time to admit it. Then there's Julie Dingley, a former big city budget leader and OMB budget veteran who now helps governments modernize. She doesn't talk ideology. She talks about spreadsheets and outcomes. Julie notes that if we kept more of our tax revenue, we'd have a lot of resources to actually solve problems. And she laments the fact that we'd be withdrawing our support from parts of the country that could really use it. But healthcare, housing, our power grid, water systems, that's real stuff. Fixable stuff on the West Coast. Stuff that federal government's not built to handle anymore. Mike Hanlon, a healthcare entrepreneur and early Amazon employee, took us into the weeds of system design. He sees the fragmentation of healthcare as one of the most solvable yet stubborn problems we face. Despite all our sensors and systems, departments in the same hospital struggle to share information, let alone deliver care that actually improves lives. In his view, we're long overdue for a redesign of healthcare that centers on people, not payers. As he put it, too much of our system is governed by people who have other concerns. John Zeisman, the Berkeley political scientist, is no fan of West Coast independence. He doesn't think it's plausible, but alliances are. If the federal government becomes hostile to West Coast priorities, clean energy, immigration, tech innovation, reproductive rights, then we need state-level compacts, international partnerships, and diplomatic imagination. That idea of alliances echoes the ethos of Yogi Uriah, the bioregional advocate from Cascadia. Yogi reminds us that boundaries don't just show up on maps, they emerge from ecosystems and shared cultural practice. He argues that identity isn't something inherited from the federal government, but cultivated through shared land, labor, and life. To him, to Yogi, the Cascadia bioregion is a framework for rediscovering community sovereignty, not necessarily to break away, but to live in alignment with place and people. His vision is rooted not in politics, but in stewardship. To Yogi, independence begins with the responsibility to the land and each other. So where does that leave us? Maybe the real story here isn't separation, it's synthesis. Ecotopia isn't just about dropping out of America. It's about choosing different design principles, radical sustainability, participatory democracy, local sovereignty, and yes, deep, messy, local interdependence. A national identity that isn't built on flags and armies and songs and the vibes of a football game, but on shared values, community deliberation, and a culture that actually feels like us. So what comes next? Here's my take. The West Coast doesn't need permission to lead. We've already got the population, the GDP, the innovation engines, the coastline, the culture, and yeah, we've got the spirit and diversity of experience and opinion. But we also need the blueprint. Let's use Ecotopia as a provocation, not a prophecy. Let's get specific. What if Cascadia and California worked together to coordinate climate infrastructure? What if we built a shared digital platform for public healthcare that's centered on our wellness? What if zoning codes prioritized affordable, communal living, intergenerational housing, ecological stewardship? What if we trained every ninth grader in deliberative democracy before they got a driver's license or a mobile phone? What if your city council meetings were held outdoors, potluck style? What if we abolished NIMBYism with the same moral urgency we bring to civil rights? People are starting to call it YIMBYism, as in, hell yeah, I want a good society in my backyard. Ecotopia gives Weston a choice: go back or stay and help build. So what do we choose? What do we do with that? Well, first, let's let go of the idea that this is about politics as usual. We're not talking about red versus blue. We're talking about whether your wait on the Social Security hotline is longer than the line at the DMV. If getting a permit to remodel your condo takes longer than it does to own your condo outright. We're talking about whether the systems that shape our lives serve us, or whether we might have to build new ones that do. We don't have to choose between isolation and submission. We can lead collaboratively. We can practice what Mickey called radical interdependence. We can build something that others want to learn from. So what's your Ecotopia? I'm not saying we should all drop out of society and start communal composting tomorrow, though honestly, if that's what it takes to get affordable avocados and housing near a light rail stop, sign me up. And I absolutely see the appeal to intergenerational living in easy-to-assemble modular homes, to gathering fresh veggies from the garden and ensuring every person actually gets a voice. So what I am saying is this: the future is not something we're handed. It's something we build deliberately, locally, imaginatively, together. Ecotopia reminds us with the clarity fiction affords that the future isn't something that just happens. It's something we build deliberately, choice by choice. What if the West Coast stopped defining itself by what it's not and started shaping itself around what it is? What if we stopped waiting for DC to save us or ruin us and built the systems we need right here? Do we sit back and wait for the next wave of dysfunction to crash? Or do we start laying bricks, green ones, metaphorical ones, compostable ones, for the future we actually want? Let's not ask, can we secede? Let's ask, can we lead? As Weston notes about Ecotopia,
participation is not optional here. It's the price of citizenship.
and so it is with participation in this Pacific Time community. Here are some questions for you that I'm hoping you'll answer on Substack and in social media. 1, What's your wish for the West Coast in 2050? What kind of interdependence do we want with the US, with the world? What would a West Coast Constitution enshrine? And what would your Ecotopia look like? Let me know. Write me, post it, share it, paint it on the mural of your local kombucha co-op, spray paint it on the skateboard you ride to the city council meeting. Let's keep imagining out loud. If sketching out the West Coast agenda seems fun, maybe even hopeful compared to the dreary national backdrop, make sure to follow Pacific Time on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Pacific Time drops new episodes most every Wednesday at 6 a.m. Pacific Time, just in time for you to go on your sunrise hike, for your drive down to get in the surfing lineup, or to get on your bike ride to a job you might just want to redesign. Please share Pacific Time with your friends, your family, and your neighbors on the West Coast. Have a chat. Read Ecotopia, talk it over, and please share your views. That's the whole idea. Hey, I'd love your suggestions for other important books to read on this journey, and let's talk about it at Pacific Time Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and the digital home we're building on Substack. This is Greg Ammerfell. Thanks for putting up with my soliloquy and my dramatic reading, and thanks as always for being with me in Pacific Time. Let's keep asking, what if, about the future of the West Coast.